She moved into the derelict manor that 7 families had fled in panic, and for 3 years she listened to the nightly weeping of a woman no one could see. But when she finally discovered who that presence was, the truth changed everything she knew about herself. Can you imagine being so broken inside that you no longer fear ghosts? Being so hollow that you prefer the company of the dead to the unbearable silence of the living? Being so lost that you accept living in a place where they say a woman was buried alive. But this story actually happened in the deep interior of the Mississippi Delta in March of 1876, in a settlement called Haven's Crossing, along the banks of the Sweetwater River. If you are enjoying this story, go ahead and smash that like button down below to support the channel. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapters. Share this with that friend who loves true stories of survival and emotion, and comment down below what you would do if you were in her shoes. This really helps the channel grow and bring more stories to you. Eleanor Sawyer was 29 years old when life stripped her of everything that remained. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces, like peeling a green fruit with your fingernails, slowly, letting the flesh sting. First, they took her husband. Then they took the baby she never got to meet. And finally, they took her will to go on. It was March, the month of heavy rains that swelled the Sweetwater River until it turned into a muddy beast that swallowed banks, bridges, and sometimes lives. Silas Sawyer was a teamster, a man of the road and of trust, hauling goods between Haven's Crossing and the neighboring towns. He was 33, with the broad shoulders of a man who had carried weight since boyhood, and a calm way of speaking that could soothe a wild mule. Eleanor had been married to him for 4 years. 4 years of waiting, of prayers to conceive, of promises made in church and to local healers, until finally, in December of 1875, her belly began to grow. Silas left early on a Tuesday morning. The sky was heavy, low clouds that seemed to rehearse a storm, but he had a commitment with a planter in Fairwater, a load of salt, kerosene, and textiles. He would return by Thursday before dusk, he promised, kissing Eleanor's forehead. She was 3 months pregnant, suffering morning sickness that left her pale until noon, but happy in a way she had never been before. Silas placed his hand on her belly and said that when he returned, they would have a name ready for the baby. "Agreed," Eleanor replied, smiling. She stood in the doorway of the small cottage they rented on Main Street, watching him vanish around the bend of the road, the laden mules bobbing their necks, his hat growing smaller until it became a dot, and then nothing. He didn't come back on Thursday nor on Friday. On Saturday morning, 2 men appeared at the door. One was Jebediah, another teamster who had known Silas since childhood. The other was Sheriff Mason. Eleanor knew before they spoke. She knew by the way Jebediah took off his hat and held it with both hands, turning the brim between nervous fingers. She knew by the silence that came before the words. "The flood took them on the way back," Jebediah explained with a choked voice. The river had risen too fast. The old plank bridge was trembling but looked safe. Silas crossed with 3 mules. In the middle of the bridge, the timber gave way. He tried to hold the reins, tried to pull the animals back, but the weight dragged everything down. Jebediah was on the other bank. He saw Eleanor's husband disappear into the muddy water, along with the mules and the cargo. He screamed his name until his voice tore. He went downstream searching, waded into the water until he nearly drowned too. He found nothing. Silas's body appeared 2 days later, 6 leagues downriver, caught on a large rock, swollen, purple, with open eyes staring at the sky, in a way Jebediah said he would never forget. Eleanor heard all of this standing up, leaning against the doorframe, hands crossed over her still-growing belly. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't faint. She only asked where the body was. Sheriff Mason explained they had already buried him in the Fairwater Cemetery. They couldn't wait. The heat, the distance, she would understand. Eleanor nodded slowly. She thanked Jebediah for trying to save him. She closed the door, and she collapsed on the beaten earth floor of the parlor, clutching her own womb, making a sound that wasn't a cry or a scream. It was something worse, something that seemed to come from a place deeper than her throat. The physical pain began in the early hours of Sunday. Sharp pangs in her belly, cramps that squeezed like an iron hand, blood running down her legs. Granny Elspeth, the town midwife, was called in a hurry. She stayed with Eleanor until dawn. There was nothing to be done. The baby came out at 3.5 months, too small, too silent, too blue. It was a boy. He would have been named Anthony, like Silas's grandfather. Granny Elspeth wrapped the tiny body in a white cloth, blessed it, and took it to be buried in the local cemetery in the Innocents' Corner, where the children who died before knowing the world lay. Eleanor stayed in bed for a week. Fever, bleeding, a weakness that left her without the strength even to turn on her side. Granny Elspeth returned every day to change the linens, make chamomile tea with wormwood, pray softly. Other women from the town brought chicken broth, hominy, words of comfort that slid off Eleanor without penetrating. She listened to everything with eyes fixed on the thatch ceiling, not answering, not thanking, not really there. When she finally managed to get up, the world had changed. Or perhaps she had changed, and the world remained the same, indifferent, spinning without waiting for anyone. The cottage she rented belonged to Mr. Fletcher, the owner of the general store in town. The rent was overdue. Silas always paid on the right day, but Silas was dead. Eleanor had no money. She had no trade. She knew how to read and write, a rare thing for a woman of her station in those times, because the aunts who raised her had insisted on it. But knowing how to read didn't fill a belly or pay for a roof. The aunts had already died. Aunt Jacinta of typhus in 1870, Aunt Emerance of old age in 1873. They had never told much about Eleanor's origins. They said only that she had been found, a word they always used, found, as if she were a lost object on a road. A distant family couldn't raise her, they explained vaguely, and we took you in because God willed it so. Eleanor grew up knowing she was different, knowing she had no roots, but Silas had made her feel she belonged somewhere for the first time. Now Silas was dead, and she was nobody once again. Mr. Fletcher was patient for 3 weeks. In the 4th week, he appeared at the door, hat in hand and looking embarrassed. "Eleanor, I'm very sorry for your situation," he said, avoiding looking her directly in the eye. "But I cannot go without payment. I have bills, I have a family. You understand, don't you?" Eleanor understood. She asked if he could give her 1 more week. Mr. Fletcher sighed and replied no, that he already had another party interested in the house, a new couple who had arrived in town. They paid in advance. Eleanor had until the end of the week to leave. She tried, she truly tried. She went to Granny Elspeth's house to ask if she could stay for a while, helping with births in exchange for food and a corner to sleep. Granny Elspeth explained with pity that the house was small. 7 people already lived there. There was no room. She went to Mr. Fletcher's store to ask if he needed someone to help at the counter. He said no, that his daughter already did that. She went to Sheriff Mason's house to ask if his wife needed a seamstress, a laundress, a cook, anything. The wife didn't even open the door fully, said through the crack that she didn't need anything and closed it quickly. The charity of the town, which had been abundant in the first week of tragedy, dried up quickly like a rain puddle in the sun. People had their own lives, their own mouths to feed. Eleanor was a young widow without children, without family, without resources. She was dead weight, a burden, a problem no one wanted to carry. It was Widow Beatrice, a lady of 60 who lived alone in a house behind the church, who mentioned the mansion. Eleanor had gone to her as a last resort, because Widow Beatrice had a reputation as a prayer warrior and a woman who never denied a plate of food to those in need. She was sitting on the wooden bench on the porch when Eleanor arrived, peeling cassava with an old knife, her thick, calloused fingers working automatically. Widow Beatrice listened to the whole situation without interrupting. When Eleanor finished speaking, the old woman remained silent for a long time, only the sound of the knife scraping the cassava skin, the song of a kiskadee in the jabuticaba tree, the warm afternoon wind passing by. Finally she put the knife aside, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at Eleanor with eyes that had seen much in life. "There is a place," said Widow Beatrice slowly, "but I don't know if you want to hear it." Eleanor replied that she wanted to hear anything. The old woman sighed deeply. "It's Blackwood Manor," she explained. "It's on the way out of town, the road to the Santa Barbara plantation. It's been closed for 20 years, but the Baron's grandson appeared last month saying that anyone who wants to live there can live for free, just so the place doesn't fall down completely." Eleanor frowned. "Why does no one live there then?" she asked. Widow Beatrice made the sign of the cross. "Because no one can, child. They've tried. 7 different families have gone to live there in these 20 years. None stayed more than a month. Some left in less than a week." Eleanor felt something cold run down her spine. "What happens there?" she asked, her voice lower. Widow Beatrice crossed herself again before answering. "They say the late Josephine is still there," said the old woman, lowering her voice too. "She was the wife of Colonel Blackwood, the Baron, as folks called him back then. They say she went mad, and her husband locked her in the room on the 3rd floor. She died in there, alone. Some folks say she had a fit, went stiff like she was dead but was still alive, and they buried her like that. Since then, the manor has no peace. The families who tried to live there speak of weeping at night, of doors opening by themselves, of the shape of a woman in white walking the halls, of a cold that isn't the cold of the weather, but the cold of something else." Eleanor should have felt fear. She should have thanked her for the information and left to find another solution. But she didn't feel fear. She felt something different. She felt almost a morbid curiosity, a strange identification. A dead and forgotten woman, trapped in a place with no one to weep for her. Eleanor felt exactly like that, dead inside, trapped in a life that made no sense anymore, with no one real. "And it's truly free?" she asked. Widow Beatrice nodded. "The Colonel's grandson, Theodore Blackwood, lives in the city. He's a lawyer. He said he wants nothing to do with it, that whoever has the courage to stay can stay. He just wants the place not to turn into a complete ruin until he decides what to do with the property." "But child," the old woman placed her wrinkled hand over Eleanor's hand, "I do not advise it. That place is not for a Christian to live. There is something bad there." Eleanor thanked her, stood up, and left. But the idea had already planted itself in her head like a seed in damp earth. A free mansion, a place no one wants, the ghost of a dead woman. What did she have to lose? Life had already taken everything. If a ghost wanted to take the rest, let it take it. The next day, she packed the few things she had into a cloth bundle, 2 changes of clothes, a shawl that had belonged to Aunt Jacinta, the old leather-bound Bible Aunt Emerence had left, the bone comb Silas had given her as a wedding gift, and the small white cloth in which Granny Elspeth had wrapped the baby for a few minutes before taking him to be buried. Eleanor had asked to keep the cloth. It smelled of old blood and pain, but it was all that remained of her son. She left the cottage without looking back. She passed the church, past Widow Beatrice, who was sitting on the porch and nodded slowly, past Mr. Fletcher's store, past the houses where she had knocked door to door, begging for help. She followed the red dirt road leading out of town toward the plantations. The April sun beat down hard, the sky clear after the March rains, dust rising with every step, the smell of burnt brush coming from some distant field. She walked for nearly an hour. The road rose and fell over small hills, bordered pastures with thin cattle, cut through dense woods in some stretches. Eleanor went slowly, still weak from the bleeding, feeling pangs in her belly now and then, but she continued. She was in no hurry. She had nowhere else to run. It was rounding a wide curve that she saw the manor for the first time. It stood atop a gentle hill, surrounded by woods that had advanced uncontrolled, swallowing what must have once been a garden. The building was immense. 2 visible floors, plus a smaller third floor with narrow windows, thick plaster walls painted white but now peeling in various parts. A roof of red tiles with pieces missing, tall windows with dirty glass, some broken. It had a large veranda in front, supported by square columns, a double main door of dark wood locked with a rusted chain, and a cracked stone staircase rising from the road to the entrance. The iron gate at the entrance of the property had fallen to one side, covered in weeds. Eleanor stepped over it and began to climb the path of irregular stones leading to the manor. The grass was high on both sides, tall weeds, nettles, vines tangling in everything. There was too much silence. Not a bird's song, not an insect's buzz, not wind in the leaves, only her footsteps snapping dry twigs. When she got close to the stairs, she stopped. She looked up. The windows of the manor looked like empty eyes. Some of the curtains inside were torn, swaying slightly even without wind. The paint on the walls peeled in large wounds, exposing the dark lath and plaster underneath. There was dampness, black mold climbing the corners, and even under the strong afternoon sun, the manor seemed to be in shadow, as if the light avoided touching it. Eleanor felt something then. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. The manor was like her, abandoned, forgotten, falling apart, but still standing, stubbornly standing. She climbed the stairs. The stone steps were cracked, some covered in moss. The chain on the main door was rusted but not locked with a padlock. Eleanor pulled and the chain gave way, falling to the ground with a metallic noise that echoed. She pushed one of the double doors. The wood groaned, the hinges squealing in a sharp sound that pierced the silence. The door opened slowly, revealing the interior. The smell was the first thing. Mold, rotting wood, animal urine, decades of dust. Eleanor covered her nose with the shawl, blinked to let her eyes adjust to the gloom. She was in a huge entrance hall. Floor of wide planks covered in dirt and dry leaves that had blown in through the windows. A wooden staircase to the right, rising to the second floor. Closed doors on each side of the hall. High ceiling with crystal chandeliers covered in spider webs, some crystals fallen on the floor, reflecting the little light that entered. She stepped in, and the door closed by itself behind her with a dull thud. Eleanor spun around fast, heart accelerating. It was just the weight of the door, she told herself, just the weight. But her hand trembled when she put the cloth bundle on the floor. The silence inside was different from the silence outside. It was dense, almost solid, as if the air were heavier. Eleanor took a deep breath and began to explore. She opened the first door on the left, a large parlor with furniture covered by dusty sheets, sofas, armchairs, a coffee table, everything still in place, untouched. It looked like people had left in a hurry and never came back. She opened another door. Dining room. Long dark wood table for 12 people, high-backed chairs, a sideboard against the wall with fine china still inside. One of the chairs was turned to the side, as if someone had stood up quickly in the middle of a meal. Kitchen in the back. Huge cast-iron wood stove, pots hanging on hooks, stone sink, manual water pump. Eleanor tried the pump. It hissed, resisted, but on the third movement, muddy water began to come out, then clearer. At least there was water. She went back to the hall and looked at the staircase. She knew she needed to go up, see the rooms, decide where to sleep. But something about the staircase made her hesitate. The wooden steps disappeared into the gloom of the second floor. There was a cold coming down from there, a cold that didn't match the April heat. Eleanor picked up the bundle, put it on her shoulder and started to climb. Every step creaked loudly. The handrail was covered in thick dust that stuck to her hand. Halfway to the second floor, she stopped. She had heard something, a sound that could be wind, could be old wood settling, or could be something else. A sigh, a low lament, coming from above. She continued climbing. The second floor had a long corridor with 4 doors on each side, all closed. Light entered through a window at the end of the hall, afternoon light that made everything golden and strange. Dust danced in the sunbeams. The smell of mold was stronger here. Eleanor opened the first door on the right. A bedroom with a double bed, wardrobe, vanity table, mouldy sheets on the mattress, window overlooking the woods in the back. She decided this would be her room. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst either. And it was far from the staircase that led to the 3rd floor, a narrow flight of stairs at the end of the hall, rising to the place where Josephine had died. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the room. She stripped the mouldy sheets, shook the mattress out the window, swept the floor with a broom made of twigs she improvised, wiped the vanity and wardrobe with a damp cloth. She found less mouldy sheets in one of the other rooms and made the bed. She filled the basin in the kitchen and brought water to the room. When she finished, the sun was already setting. Night came quickly. Eleanor had no lamp, no candle. She sat in the dark of the room on the bed, listening to the sounds of the manor, wood popping, wind blowing through the cracks, sounds of animals on the roof, probably a possum or bat, and every now and then something else, a dragging sound, a step in the hall, a door groaning downstairs. She didn't go to investigate. She lay on the bed still dressed, pulled the thin sheet up to her chin and closed her eyes. She thought of Silas. She thought of the baby she never knew. She thought of the aunts who had raised her without ever telling the truth. She thought that maybe the next day she would wake up dead, that Josephine's ghost would come during the night and take her too. And she discovered she didn't care. That was how she fell asleep, with this almost peaceful indifference regarding her own fate. She woke in the middle of the night to a sound that wasn't wood, wasn't an animal, wasn't wind. It was weeping, a woman's weeping. Low, muffled, coming from above, coming from the 3rd floor. Eleanor sat up in bed. Her heart beat fast now. Finally there was fear, an ancient and instinctive fear. The weeping continued. It wasn't loud. It was intimate, desperate, as if the person were crying alone, expecting no comfort. It rose and fell in irregular sobs, and there were words. Eleanor couldn't distinguish them, but there were words, mixed with the sobs. She stayed in bed, pulling the sheet up to her nose, eyes wide at the dark ceiling. The weeping lasted a long time. Half an hour. An hour. It diminished little by little until it became a whisper, until it became silence. When the silence returned, Eleanor realized she was sweating cold, shaking, her hands numb from gripping the sheet so hard. But she didn't run away. She didn't flee like the other families. She stayed there, listening to her own breathing, waiting for dawn. And when the sun finally broke, and light returned to enter through the window, Eleanor got up, washed her face with the water from the basin, combed her hair, and went down to the kitchen to see what she could find to eat. Because if she was going to live there, if she was going to live with Josephine's ghost, then she needed to eat, she needed to live, even if she didn't quite know why. And up there on the 3rd floor, in the room locked for 20 years, something watched the woman who had arrived, watched and waited, because Eleanor Sawyer didn't know it yet, but she hadn't come to live in that manor by chance. She had come home. The first few days at Blackwood Manor were of basic survival. Eleanor woke with the sun, went down to the kitchen, managed to light a fire in the wood stove using dry twigs she gathered in the yard. She had no food. She went into town on the 3rd day and used the last coin she had to buy cassava flour, beans, hard molasses and lard. The shopkeeper looked at her with pity mixed with something darker, perhaps fear, perhaps contempt. "You're really living there?" he asked in a low voice. Eleanor confirmed she was. The man made the sign of the cross and wrapped the groceries in brown paper without saying another word. She returned to the manor carrying the bundle in her arms, walking up the dirt road under the strong May sun. The sensation of being watched accompanied her the entire way. Not by people. The road was empty. It was something else, something invisible that walked beside her, measuring her steps, waiting. The nights were worse than the days. Every nightfall, around 10 o'clock, the weeping began, always from the third floor. Always that muffled, intimate, desperate sound. Eleanor lay in the dark of her room, eyes open, listening. In the first few days, she felt her heart race, her breath catch, the icy fear climb up her spine. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The fear began to diminish. And in its place came curiosity, then compassion, then something Eleanor couldn't name. Because that weeping wasn't threatening. It was sad. It was lonely. It was the weeping of someone who had been forgotten, abandoned, buried alive not only in body, but in memory. Eleanor knew that pain. She was living that pain. In the second week, she did something none of the other families had done. She spoke to the weeping. It was Thursday night. The crying had started earlier, around 9 o'clock, louder than usual. Eleanor was lying in bed, but this time she wasn't afraid. She was tired. Tired of the loneliness, tired of the silence during the day and the weeping during the night, tired of being alive without really living. So she sat up in bed, turned her face toward the ceiling, toward where the sound came from, and spoke aloud. "I know you're there," Eleanor said to the dark. "I know you're suffering. I am too. I lost my husband. I lost my son. I have no one left. So if you want to scare me, if you want to make me leave, you'll have to do more than cry. Because I have nowhere else to go, and I'm no longer afraid of dying." The weeping stopped, suddenly. In the middle of a sob, it cut off dry, leaving a silence so deep Eleanor heard her own heart beating. She waited. Nothing happened. The silence continued for the rest of the night. The next morning, Eleanor woke with the feeling that something had changed. She couldn't explain what. The air seemed different, less heavy. The light entering through the window seemed clearer. She went down to the kitchen, made watery coffee sweetened with molasses and toasted flour, ate sitting at the big dining room table. And while she ate, she had the absolute certainty that she wasn't alone. There was someone sitting at the other end of the table, someone invisible, someone watching. Eleanor didn't turn to look. She continued eating slowly, chewing the hard flour, drinking the hot coffee. When she finished, she stood up, gathered the mug and the plate, and said in a normal voice, as if speaking to a person of flesh and blood, "I'm going to wash these dishes, then I'm going to clean the parlor. If you want to help me, you can. If you just want to watch, that's fine too." It was from that day on that the coexistence began. Eleanor started talking to herself all the time. She narrated what she was doing, commented on the weather, on the bad food she cooked, on memories of Silas and the baby. She spoke in the morning, in the afternoon, at night. She spoke to the walls, to the air, to the invisible presence she knew was there. And the presence responded, not with words, but with signs. A door opening by itself exactly when Eleanor needed to pass, a window closing when the cold night wind began to enter. Once she was looking for a needle and thread in one of the rooms on the second floor, rummaging through drawers, when she heard a dry noise on the vanity behind her. She turned and saw a sewing box that wasn't there before, lid open, thread and needle visible inside. Eleanor picked up the box, examined it and said aloud, "Thank you, Miss Josephine." The nightly weeping continued, but its quality changed. It became less desperate, more melancholic. And Eleanor discovered that if she spoke softly during the crying, if she said things like, "I'm here, you're not alone, I understand," the weeping diminished. Sometimes it stopped. Sometimes it transformed into something that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. 3 weeks after arriving at the manor, Eleanor decided to explore the basement. She had avoided it until then because the cellar seemed the gloomiest place in the entire building. The entrance was in the kitchen, a low door of thick wood with a rusted latch. She opened the door on a morning of strong sun, when natural light flooded through all the windows and the manor seemed less threatening. The wooden stairs descended steeply into complete darkness. Smell of damp earth, mold, dead rat. Eleanor had no lamp, but she had improvised a torch with a stick and a rag soaked in lard. She lit it at the stove and descended slowly, holding the torch in front, testing each step before placing her weight. The basement was large, low ceiling with thick wooden beams, beaten earth floor, damp stone walls with moss. There were trunks stacked in a corner, shelves with dusty jars, broken furniture, a large cracked mirror leaning against the wall. The torchlight made the shadows dance, creating shapes that seemed to move. Eleanor went to the trunks, opened the first one. Old clothes eaten by moths, smell of camphor and mold, closed it, opened the second. Books swollen by humidity, pages stuck together, closed it, opened the third, and stopped. There was a portrait, an oil painting in an oval dark wood frame, a woman's face. Young, perhaps 30 years old, black hair pulled back in a high bun, light eyes that seemed to look directly at whoever viewed them, small mouth without a smile, high-collared lace dress. And what made Eleanor drop the torch on the dirt and bring her hands to her face was the resemblance. The woman in the portrait could be her sister. No, it could be herself. The shape of the face, the arch of the eyebrows, the straight nose, the shape of the eyes. Eleanor picked up the portrait with trembling hands, brought it close to the torchlight on the ground. At the bottom of the frame was a small brass plaque with an inscription, Josephine Cavendish Blackwood, 1854. Eleanor's heart beat so hard she heard the pulse in her ears. Josephine, Miss Josephine, the woman who had died on the 3rd floor, the woman who wept every night, the woman who had her face. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be just a casual resemblance. Eleanor sat on the damp earth of the basement, holding the portrait in her lap, looking at that face that was almost her own. And for the first time since Silas died, she cried. She cried because suddenly she had a question she had never properly asked, a question she had pushed to the back of her mind her whole life. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why had the aunts never told the truth? She came up from the basement carrying the portrait, took it to her room, cleaned the frame with a damp cloth, leaned it on the vanity. She stared at the painting until the sun went down. And that night, when the weeping began upstairs, Eleanor climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, walked down the hall to the end, and for the first time stood in front of the narrow staircase leading to the 3rd floor. "Who are you?" she asked upward, to the weeping coming from the floor above. "Why do you have my face?" The weeping grew louder, more urgent, as if the presence were trying to say something, trying to answer. Eleanor placed her foot on the first step of the narrow stairs. The weeping increased. She placed her foot on the 2nd step. The cold came down like a wave, a cold that made her bones ache. On the 3rd step, she heard something new, not just weeping. It was a voice, weak, distant, but a voice, saying one word, just one word, repeated, "Blood, blood, blood." Eleanor retreated. The cold vanished. The weeping returned to normal, that melancholic lament. She went down the narrow stairs, returned to her room, lay on the bed looking at the portrait on the vanity. Blood, she thought. What did Josephine mean by blood? It was the next day that the priest appeared. Eleanor was in the backyard trying to pull up the weeds that had taken over what must have once been a vegetable garden. The morning sun was strong. She had tied her hair back with a rag, hands dirty with earth, when she heard the sound of footsteps on the side of the manor. She tensed, stood up, holding the improvised hoe. An old man appeared, rounding the corner of the building. He was thin, tall, back curved with age, worn black cassock, straw hat on his head, wooden cane in his right hand. He had white hair, wrinkled face, small but lively eyes. He stopped when he saw Eleanor and took off his hat in a polite gesture. "Good morning," he said with a hoarse but firm voice. "You are the young woman living here, aren't you?" Eleanor nodded slowly, still holding the hoe. The man smiled. "No need to be afraid. I am Father Ignatius from Our Lady of Sorrows Church in town. I came here because I am worried about you." Eleanor relaxed a little, let go of the hoe. "Worried why?" she asked. The priest approached slowly, leaning on the cane. "Because this place has a history, my child. A heavy history. And no one who tried to live here stayed very long. But I heard you've been here almost a month. That made me curious." She offered him watery coffee with molasses. They sat in the kitchen at the long table. The priest drank the coffee without complaining about the bad taste, looking around with the expression of someone seeing ghosts of the past. "I knew this house when it was new," he said slowly. "I was a young seminarian when Colonel Blackwood built this in 1842. Big party at the inauguration. Half the state came. The colonel was a powerful man, had land, slaves, political influence, and his wife, Miss Josephine, was a beautiful girl from a good family in New Orleans." Eleanor leaned forward, heart accelerating. "Tell me more about her," she asked. The priest fell silent for a moment, eyes lost in old memories. Josephine was intelligent, cultured, knew how to read, play piano, spoke French. But she had a sad way about her, you know. Even at parties, even laughing, there was sadness deep in her eyes. I married her and the colonel in 1850, when I took over the parish. I was a new priest, thought it was a love match. Later I discovered it wasn't. The colonel was a rigid man, jealous, violent when he drank. The priest paused, drank more coffee, and then in 1854 Josephine got pregnant. I remember this well because she came to confess to me crying, saying she had sinned. At the time I didn't understand exactly what she meant, thought it was just the guilt of a pregnant woman, matters of faith. But now, thinking back, she was saying something else. "What thing?" pressed Eleanor. The priest looked at her with eyes that had seen much suffering in life. "That the child wasn't her husband's, my child. Josephine had had an affair, and she had gotten pregnant by the other man." The silence in the kitchen became dense. Eleanor felt the blood pulsing in her temples. "Go on, please," she said with a raspy voice. The priest sighed. "The child was born in the summer of 1854. A girl. Difficult birth. The midwife said they almost lost both, but the baby survived. She was healthy, strong, and Josephine seemed like another woman in the first few days, happy in a way I had never seen her be. But the colonel wasn't a fool. He looked at the child, and he saw." "Saw what?" asked Eleanor, almost voiceless. "Saw that she wasn't his," replied the priest. "I don't know if it was the color of the skin a shade darker, or some feature of the face, or just the intuition of a betrayed man. But he knew, and 2 months after the birth, the baby disappeared. Josephine said the child had died, but they let no one see the body. There was no wake, no burial in the church. And right after that, the colonel began saying Josephine had gone mad with grief over losing her daughter." Eleanor could barely breathe. "And what happened to her?" she asked. The priest made the sign of the cross. "They locked her in the room on the 3rd floor, said it was for her own good, that she was a danger to herself. I tried to visit, tried to speak with the colonel, but he threw me off the property, said family matters were not priest matters. Josephine stayed locked in there for almost 2 years, and in 1856 they found her dead in the room. The official version was a cataleptic fit, but there were people who worked here, people who heard things, who said she was poisoned little by little. And there are even those who say that when they opened the coffin to bury her, she had broken nails, scratched hands, like someone trying to get out of somewhere. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. This story is just starting to get intense. Eleanor was pale, hands trembling around the coffee mug. "And the baby," she whispered. "What really happened to the baby?" The priest shook his head. "No one knows for sure. Some say the colonel ordered her killed. Some say she was given for adoption in another town, far away, where no one would know her origin. Some say she was given to a family of freed slaves. The truth was lost. The colonel died in 1868 without ever speaking of the matter. And the manor has been closed since then." Eleanor stood up suddenly, went to the room, returned carrying the portrait, placed it in front of the priest. "Is this her?" she asked. The priest looked and went very quiet. He picked up the portrait with trembling hands, brought it close to his eyes. "Yes," he said with a choked voice, "it is Josephine. This portrait was painted in 1854, right after she got pregnant. I remember it in the parlor. After she died, the colonel removed all her portraits from the house." Eleanor sat again, looked at the priest, and said the thing that was stuck in her throat since she had seen the portrait. "She looks just like me." The priest raised his eyes from the portrait, looked at Eleanor's face, looked at the portrait again, and went pale. "Mother of God," he whispered, "it is true. You are the spitting image of her." "I was found," said Eleanor, voice trembling. "The aunts who raised me always said I had been found, that a distant family couldn't raise me. They never told me more than that. And they lived in Cotton Creek, 3 days' journey from here." The priest placed the portrait on the table slowly, as if it were a sacred object. "What year were you born, my child?" he asked. "In 1847, replied Eleanor. The priest closed his eyes. "The math doesn't work," he said. "Josephine's daughter was born in 1854. You would be older." "Unless," said Eleanor slowly, "Josephine's daughter also had a daughter. Unless I am a granddaughter, not a daughter." The priest opened his eyes. "It is possible," he agreed slowly. "If the baby was given for adoption in 1854 and grew up and had a daughter in 1847... No, wait. The math still doesn't close. If you were born in 1847, it would be before Josephine had the baby." Eleanor felt her stomach turn. Then she wasn't her granddaughter, or the whole story was wrong, or... She stopped, thinking fast. Or Josephine had another child before, a child no one knew about. The priest stared at her with the expression of someone seeing the revelation of an ancient mystery. "It is possible," he said slowly. "It is possible there was another child, older, who was hidden even before she married the colonel, and you could be the daughter of that first child." It was too much information, too much possibility. Too many things that weren't confirmed, but made sense in a twisted and painful way. Eleanor put her face in her hands. "Father," she said without looking up, "I need to know the truth. I need to know who I am." The priest placed his old, wrinkled hand on her shoulder. "I will help you, my child. I will search the church records, the old documents. If there are answers, we will find them." He left, promising to return. Eleanor stayed in the kitchen holding the portrait, looking at that face that was her face, feeling that something huge and frightening was opening beneath her feet. That night the weeping was different. It wasn't just lament. It was urgency, and the voice repeated the word, blood, blood, blood. Eleanor finally understood. It wasn't blood of death. It was blood of family, blood of connection. Josephine was trying to say they were linked, that Eleanor belonged there, that she wasn't an intruder, she was an heir. But if that was true, there was someone who wasn't going to like knowing it at all. Theodore Blackwood arrived on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the priest's visit. Eleanor was in the yard, hanging washed rags on an improvised clothesline, when she heard the sound of a horse. She went to the front of the manor and saw a man dismounting a bay horse, handsome, well-groomed. The man wore a dark suit, felt hat, leather boots. He was about 38, trimmed mustache, gold-rimmed spectacles, expression of someone very irritated. "Are you the woman living here?" he asked without greeting, voice firm and impatient. Eleanor walked down the front stairs slowly. "I am. And who are you?" "Theodore Blackwood, owner of this property, and I did not authorize anyone to live here." Eleanor felt anger rise. "Widow Beatrice said you had said whoever wanted to live could live, just so the place wouldn't fall down," she replied, keeping her voice calm. Theodore huffed. "I did say that, yes. But I thought people would have the common sense to realize it is impossible to live here and leave soon. I didn't think anyone would actually stay, and especially didn't think it would be a woman alone." "Well, I stayed," said Eleanor, raising her chin, "and I intend to continue." Theodore took off his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, put them back on. "Look," he said with the tone of someone speaking to a stubborn child, "I understand you are in a difficult situation, heard about the husband's tragedy, my condolences, but this place is not suitable. It is dangerous, it is falling to pieces. And there is the matter of—" He hesitated. "Of reputation." "Reputation doesn't kill me," replied Eleanor. "Lack of a roof does." Theodore pressed his lips together. "I will be direct then. I have plans for this land. I am going to demolish this building and sell the lot to a planter who wants to expand. It is valuable land, and I need it vacant by the end of the year." Eleanor felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. By the end of the year? That was 7 months away. "Yes," confirmed Theodore. "So you need to leave. I can give a small compensation to help you relocate." Eleanor shook her head. "I will not leave." Theodore lost his patience. "You have no choice. This manor is mine by inheritance. I have the deed. I decide what to do with it. And I have decided it will be demolished." "Why?" asked Eleanor, taking a step forward. "Why are you in such a hurry to destroy this place?" Theodore tensed. "Because it is a monument of shame for my family. My grandfather did terrible things here, things that stained the Blackwood name. I want to erase that." "Erase what?" I pressed Eleanor. "What did he do?" Theodore didn't answer, turned his back, went to the horse, mounted, prepared to leave, but before that looked at Eleanor from atop the animal. "2 weeks," he said with a cold voice. "I give you 2 weeks to leave voluntarily. Afterward, I will take legal measures, and if that doesn't work, I will have to use other means." And he spurred the horse down the road. Eleanor stood there, heart beating fast, hands clenched into fists. Other means. What did he mean by other means? She discovered in the following days. First, the grocer in town refused to sell anything else to her. Said he had orders from Mr. Theodore, who was an influential man, that he couldn't go against. Eleanor had to go to another village, 2 hours' walk, to buy supplies. Second, rumors began, that she was going mad like Josephine, that she talked to herself, that she was possessed, that she was dangerous. Third, twice someone threw rocks at the manor windows during the night, breaking glass. Fourth, someone cut her clothesline, dropping the washed clothes into the mud. They were small, petty attacks, but effective. Eleanor began to feel surrounded, pressured, pushed out, and the worst was the loneliness. Father Ignatius had returned 2 more times, but each time stayed less, clearly uncomfortable with the social pressure. Widow Beatrice had stopped waving when Eleanor passed her house. The whole town had turned its back. It was on a June afternoon, when Eleanor was returning from the distant village carrying a sack of supplies, that an old woman appeared on the road. She was black, white hair in a bun, face wrinkled like ancient tree bark, back curved, simple but clean clothes, a worn shawl over her shoulders. She stood in the middle of the road as if waiting. When Eleanor approached, the woman spoke with a voice raspy but firm. "You are the girl living in the Colonel's manor." Eleanor stopped, cautious. "I am." The woman looked at her with eyes the color of old honey. "My name is Serafina. I worked in that manor when I was young. I was a slave of the Colonel, was freed after the war but continued working there as a maid until Miss Josephine died. I saw things, I know things, and you need to listen." Eleanor felt her heart race. They returned to the manor together, sat in the kitchen. Serafina looked around with eyes full of memory and pain. "I was 17 when I came to work here," she began. "Miss Josephine was still a young girl, had been married a short time. She was good to the slaves, treated us with respect, but the Colonel was different, was a bad man, drank, beat his wife when he thought she crossed him, and was sick with jealousy." Serafina paused, drank the coffee Eleanor had served. "Miss Josephine had an affair," she continued in a low voice, "with a man who wasn't her husband. I know because I saw. He came at night, climbed up to her room, handsome man. Mulatto with green eyes, free-born, knew how to read, worked as a traveling teacher. His name was Lawrence. They truly loved each other, you could see. It wasn't just desire, it was love." Eleanor's heart tightened. "And the child?" she asked. Serafina nodded slowly. "Miss Josephine got pregnant in 1853. She tried to disguise it, tried to make the Colonel believe it was his, and for a time it worked, but when the baby was born, the Colonel saw. The girl had Lawrence's features, there was no denying it, and the Colonel lost his head." "What did he do?" whispered Eleanor. Serafina closed her eyes, as if she didn't want to see the memories. "He tore the baby from Miss Josephine's arms 2 months after the birth. She screamed, begged, but he didn't listen. Said he was going to get rid of that bastard. I never knew exactly what he did. Gave her to someone, ordered her killed, I don't know. But the child disappeared, and Miss Josephine never recovered." Tears ran down Eleanor's face. "And then?" she asked. Serafina opened her red eyes. "Then he locked her up there, said she had gone mad. But it wasn't madness, it was despair. She wept day and night, asked for her daughter, asked to see Lawrence. The Colonel forbade any visits. Locked her in that room and threw away the key. I took food to her once a day, climbed the narrow stairs, passed the tray through the crack in the door. She always asked about the baby." "Always?" Serafina took a deep breath. "In 1856, in the summer, I went up with the food in the morning, passed the tray. Miss Josephine didn't come to get it. I called. Nothing. The Colonel went up, broke down the door. She was lying on the bed, pale, stiff, eyes open, staring at nothing. The doctor who came said it was a cataleptic fit, but I know it wasn't." "How do you know?" asked Eleanor, barely managing to speak. "Because I saw the Colonel putting white powder in her food," replied Serafina, looking straight into Eleanor's eyes. "Arsenic. He was poisoning her little by little, over months, and on the day she died, the dose must have been bigger. But there's worse. When they went to bury her 2 days later in the closed coffin, no wake, I passed by the parlour where the coffin was, and I heard scratching coming from inside. I knocked on the wood. The scratch answered. Miss Josephine was alive, trapped in a fit that looked like death, and they buried her like that." Eleanor stood up suddenly, went to the sink, vomited. Serafina waited. When Eleanor returned pale and shaking, the old woman continued. "Tried to tell someone, but who was going to believe a former slave? The priest was new, had no power against the Colonel, and Lawrence had disappeared right after the baby vanished. They say the Colonel ordered him killed too, but they never found a body. The truth was buried along with Miss Josephine until now." "Why are you telling me this now?" asked Eleanor. Serafina pointed to the portrait on the table. "Because you have her face, and I think that isn't chance." I think you are her blood, and I think she brought you here because she wants justice." Eleanor sat slowly, told Serafina everything. Father Ignatius, the calculations of dates that didn't close properly, the possibility of there having been another child before. Serafina listened to everything, and at the end said something that made it all make sense. "There was another child?" Eleanor looked at her with wide eyes. Serafina continued. "In 1846, the year before Miss Josephine married the colonel, she came to visit her father's plantation near here. She was a young girl, 17, heard tell, just slave gossip, that she got involved with someone that summer, and that she went back to New Orleans pregnant. The family hid it, must have sent her to some convent or relative's house far away until the child was born, and then must have given the child for adoption. That child would have been born in 1847, like you." Eleanor couldn't breathe. "So I am the daughter of Josephine's first child. No, I am the child born in 1847. I am her daughter." Serafina nodded. "And you have a right to be here, more right than Theodore, because you are a direct blood descendant of Josephine. He is only a grandson from the side of the colonel, the murderer." "But how do I prove this?" asked Eleanor. Serafina stood up, leaned on the back of the chair. "The secret is in the locked room, always has been. Josephine left proof there. I know because I saw her writing, hiding things, in the last months before dying. She knew she was going to die, and she left the truth hidden. You need to enter that room." "But the door has been locked for 20 years, protested Eleanor, "and I don't have the key." Serafina smiled for the first time, a joyless smile. "Then you break it down, like the colonel did, because what is in there is yours by right. And the time has come for the truth to come out of the dark." The old woman left, leaving Eleanor alone with an impossible decision. That night, the weeping didn't come from the 3rd floor. It came from inside Eleanor's room. She woke sweating, heart racing, and saw a figure of a woman in white standing beside the bed. She wasn't solid. She was translucent, made of mist and moonlight. But she had a face, Josephine's face, Eleanor's face. The figure pointed upward with a ghostly hand, then pointed to her own chest, to her heart, and whispered with a voice that seemed to come from very far away, "Blood of my blood, truth in the dark, rise, rise and set free." And she disappeared like smoke. Eleanor sat in bed until dawn, trembling, sweating, shaking. When the sun rose, she made a decision. She was going up. She was going to break down that door. She was going to discover the truth. It didn't matter what Theodore did. It didn't matter what the town thought. It didn't matter if the manor was haunted or cursed, because now she knew that place wasn't a prison. It was an inheritance. Eleanor spent the entire morning looking for tools, found a rusted iron crowbar in the back shed, a heavy hammer with a split handle, and an old saw with broken teeth. Took everything inside, climbed to the 2nd floor, and stood in the hallway looking at the narrow stairs leading to the 3rd floor. It was noon. Sunlight streamed strong through the window at the end of the hall, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. The manor was silent. But it wasn't empty silence. It was a silence of waiting, as if the whole building were holding its breath. Eleanor climbed the narrow stairs slowly. The steps creaked loudly under her feet. The cold began on the 5th step, that impossible cold that didn't come from the weather, but from something else. On the 10th step, she could already see her own breath forming a white cloud in the air, and on the last step, when she reached the small landing of the 3rd floor, the cold was so intense it made her bones ache. There was only one door, dark, thick wood, brass knob covered in rust, ancient keyhole locked tight. Eleanor placed her hand on the wood. It was freezing like ice, put her ear against it. Silence, but not complete silence. There was something, a breath, a pulse, a living presence on the other side. "Miss Josephine," said Eleanor aloud, "I am here. I'm going to open this door. I'm going to discover the truth, and I'm going to bring justice. I promise." The cold became more intense for a second, so strong Eleanor almost screamed in pain. Then it diminished, returned to normal, and she heard, clear as a bell, a woman's voice saying, "Thank you." Eleanor jammed the tip of the crowbar between the door and the jamb, at the height of the lock. Began to force it. The wood was old but resistant, creaked, groaned but didn't give. She forced more, putting all her body weight on the lever. Sweat ran down her face despite the cold. Her arm muscles burned, forced more, and finally, with a dry, loud crack, the lock broke. The door swung open by itself, pushing Eleanor backward. A freezing wind rushed out of the room like an exhalation from a tomb, smell of mold, rotting wood, and something else. Something sweet and rotten at the same time, the smell of ancient death. Eleanor took a deep breath and entered. The room was small. Double bed pushed against the right wall, yellowed and mouldy sheets covering the mattress. Dark wood dresser with a cracked mirror on the left. Rocking chair fallen on its side. Small window with closed curtains, torn in several places. Floorboards covered in dust so thick it held tracks of rats and bats. And in the right corner of the room, by the bed, was a writing desk. Eleanor went to it. The desk was small, feminine, with 3 drawers. On top of it was a brass candlestick with a candle burnt to the end, an empty glass inkwell, and a dried quill. Eleanor opened the first drawer, empty. Opened the second. Yellowed papers, folded letters, a wooden rosary. Opened the third drawer, and stopped. There was a book. Worn brown leather cover, pages yellowed at the edges, no title on the cover. Eleanor picked up the book with trembling hands, took it to the window, opened the curtain to let the light in. Dust exploded in the air, making her cough. When the dust settled, she opened the book to the first page. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, slanted to the right. The ink was faded, but still legible. At the top of the page was written, "Diary of Josephine Cavendish Blackwood, January 1854. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair she had righted and began to read. The pages told the story Seraphina had started. Josephine wrote about the unhappy marriage, about the violent and jealous husband, about the loneliness. And then she wrote about Lawrence. The pages dedicated to him were different. The handwriting became looser, more alive. She wrote with love. Lawrence came for the first time in March. He was giving private lessons to children of planters in the region. The colonel hired him to teach me French, believing I needed refinement. But Lawrence taught me much more than French. He taught me there was still beauty in the world, that there was still kindness, that I was still capable of feeling. Eleanor turned the pages quickly, searching, and found it, entry from August 1853. "I am pregnant, I am certain. The nausea, the lateness, the fatigue, and I know whose child it is. It is not the colonel's. He touches me so rarely, and always with violence, never with love. This child is Lawrence's. It is the fruit of true love. I am afraid. I am so afraid. But I am also happy in a way I have never been before. This child is my salvation." More pages. Entry from February 1854. "My daughter was born today. She is perfect, small but strong. Cried loud when the midwife cut the cord. Has Lawrence's eyes, that shade of honey green. Has skin a little darker than mine, but not enough to be obvious. Or perhaps it is. The colonel has not come to see yet. Said he is busy, but I know. He is avoiding. He knows. I know he knows." Entry from April 1854. "The colonel took my baby, tore her from my arms while I screamed, said he is going to get rid of the bastard, said he will not raise another man's child. I begged. I crawled on the floor, begging. He kicked me and left with my daughter. I don't know where he took her. I don't know if she is still alive. I can't breathe right. The pain is physical. It is as if they ripped my heart out of my chest and kept beating it. Eleanor had tears running down her face, continued reading. The following entries were increasingly short, more desperate. Josephine wrote about being locked in the room, about the loneliness, about the despair. And then, entry from December 1855. I discovered something that changes everything. Serafina told me in secret through the crack in the door. My first daughter is still alive, the daughter I had before marrying, the daughter my parents took from me when I was 17. They sent me to the convent in New Orleans. When they found out I was pregnant, by the teacher who taught me piano, said it was shame that I had stained the family honor. The child was born in March of 1847, was a girl. They tore her from me minutes after birth. I didn't even see her face properly. Said they had given her for adoption in a distant town, Cotton Creek, to a family of 2 spinster sisters who couldn't have children. I never knew the name they gave her, never knew if she survived. And now, Serafina tells me this daughter grew up. I have a child in the world I will never know, and now I lost the second daughter too. I lost everything. Eleanor stopped reading. Her heart beat so loud she heard it in her ears. The math finally worked. Josephine had her first daughter in 1847. That daughter was given to Eleanor's aunts, the spinster sisters of Cotton Creek. That daughter was Eleanor. The aunts never told the truth, raised Eleanor saying she had been found, when in truth she was Josephine's daughter. Mariana, that was the name on the paper my father signed, but they called her Eleanor. I am her mother, and I never held her. Eleanor was Josephine's blood, was the legitimate heir, was the only living descendant of Josephine Cavendish Blackwood. She continued reading the diary. The last entries were from January 1856. I know I am going to die. The colonel is putting poison in my food. I taste the bitterness, feel my body getting weaker every day, and I fight no more. I am tired. I want to go. But before going, I need to leave the truth recorded. I hide this diary, Lawrence's letters, the birth certificate of my first daughter, that I managed to steal from my father's papers before marrying, and the will I wrote in secret with Serafina's help. If someday someone finds this, they will know the truth, will know I was murdered, will know I had 2 daughters who were stolen from me, will know Colonel Blackwood is a monster, not a man. And whoever finds this, if they are my blood, has a right to everything that was mine. This is my last will. It was the last entry. Eleanor closed the diary, hugged it against her chest, and wept. Wept for Josephine. Wept for the mother she never really had. Wept for Silas and the baby. Wept for all the women stolen, silenced, buried alive one way or another. When she stopped crying, she went back to the desk, took the papers from the second drawer. There were letters from Lawrence, dozens of them, written in a firm, beautiful, masculine hand. Love letters, promises of a future, escape plans that never happened. There was a yellowed birth certificate issued by the Convent of Mercy, dated March 15th, 1847. Born on this date, daughter of Josephine Cavendish, girl, baptized with the name Mariana Cavendish, given for adoption in the town of Cotton Creek. Mariana. Eleanor's real name was Mariana, and the aunts had never told, had taken the secret to the grave, and there was a final document, thick paper, folded in 4, sealed with wax that had cracked with time. Eleanor opened it carefully. It was a handwritten will. I, Josephine Cavendish Blackwood, in full command of my mental faculties, declare as my last will that all assets brought as dowry to the marriage, including the lands that were my family's and were incorporated into the Blackwood property, be destined to my direct female descendants. I declare that my husband, Augustus Blackwood, keeps me prisoner and is poisoning me slowly. I declare I am a victim of premeditated murder, and I declare that whoever finds this will has my authorization to use it to claim justice. Signed, January 20th, 1856, witnessed by Serafina Jones, freedwoman. Below, Josephine's shaky signature. And below, an X marked by Serafina, who didn't know how to write her own name. Eleanor looked around the room. All those years, 20 years. The truth was there, waiting, and Josephine was trapped with it, waiting for someone of her blood to come and discover it. And now Eleanor had found it. She gathered everything, diary, letters, certificate, will, wrapped them in a clean cloth she brought from her room, and descended the stairs, holding the bundle as if carrying treasure. Because it was treasure, it was truth, it was justice, it was a weapon. She spent the rest of the day reading everything again, memorizing. When night came, she waited. The weeping didn't come. For the first time since arriving at the manor, the night was completely silent. As if Josephine were finally resting, as if she knew her part was done. The next day, Eleanor went to town to find Father Ignatius. He was in the church, organizing candles for the afternoon mass. When he saw Eleanor enter carrying the cloth bundle, he went pale. "Child, what did you do?" he asked with a low voice. Eleanor placed the bundle on the church pew, opened it, showed everything. The priest read the diary with trembling hands, read the letters, read the certificate, and when he read the will, he sat on the bench as if his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "Mother of God," he whispered, crossing himself, This is proof of murder." Eleanor nodded. "And proof that I am Josephine's daughter. Proof that the manor doesn't belong only to Theodore. It belongs to me too." The priest looked at her with eyes full of fear and admiration. "Child, if you show this to Theodore, it will become a war. The Blackwood family has power, has money, has influence. They won't accept this quietly." Eleanor raised her chin. "I don't care. Josephine was murdered. She was buried alive. She was forgotten. And I am her blood. I have to bring justice." The priest remained silent for a long time, finally nodded. "I testify that these documents are authentic. Josephine's handwriting, I recognize it. I married her. I heard her confession. I know this is the truth. And I will support you, even if it costs me dearly." Guys, this story is reaching the most exciting ending. Leave a like if you are feeling every word of this story. Theodore returned 3 days later, as he had promised, but this time he didn't come alone. He brought 2 men with him. One was a lawyer from the city, thin and pale, with a leather briefcase. The other was a hired hand, a big man with broad shoulders and a face of few friends. Eleanor was waiting on the manor porch. She had put on the best dress she had, combed her hair, and held the cloth bundle against her chest. Father Ignatius was beside her, black cassock, serious expression. Theodore dismounted with the expression of someone coming to perform an unpleasant but necessary task. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said with a formal voice, "I brought my lawyer, Mr. Bellamy, to formalize your departure from this property. We have prepared a document that—" Eleanor interrupted him. "Before that, I need to show you something, sir." Theodore frowned. "Show what?" Eleanor opened the bundle, took the diary, extended it. "This, the diary of Miss Josephine, your grandmother." Theodore stood motionless. The lawyer approached, curious. The hired hand remained behind, hand on the knife hilt at his waist. Theodore took the diary slowly, opened it, read a few pages. His face grew paler and paler. "Where did you find this?" he asked with a hoarse voice. "In the room on the 3rd floor," replied Eleanor calmly. "The room where your grandfather locked her. The room where she died." Theodore flipped through more pages, reading fast, stopped at the final entries, those that spoke of the poison. Read and reread. The hand holding the diary trembled. This proves nothing," he said finally, but without conviction. "These are just the words of a sick woman." Eleanor took the birth certificate, extended it. "Then what does this prove?" Theodore read, frowned. "A child born in 1847. So what?" Eleanor took a deep breath. That child was named Mariana Cavendish. She was given for adoption in Cotton Creek, to two sisters, the sisters who raised me. I am Mariana. Josephine was my mother. I am her blood. I am her heir. And the silence was absolute. Theodore looked at Eleanor as if seeing a ghost. The lawyer approached, took the certificate, examined it. "It is a legitimate document," he murmured. "Convent seal, nun's signature, clear date." Theodore shook his head. "Even if it is true, even if you are a descendant, it changes nothing. My grandfather inherited everything from Josephine when she died. The property is mine by legal right." Eleanor took the will, extended it. "Not if she left a will to the contrary." Theodore snatched the paper from her hand, read quickly, went white. This has no validity," he said, but his voice failed. "It was written by a woman declared insane. No judge will accept it." Father Ignatius stepped forward. "I accept it," he said with a firm voice. "I testify that Josephine was not insane. She was a prisoner. She was a victim. And this will is valid in the eyes of God, even if not in the eyes of men's law. But more importantly, this will, along with the diary, proves murder, proves Augustus Blackwood killed his own wife, and that, Mr. Theodore, changes everything." Theodore was sweating now, looked at the lawyer. "Mr. Bellamy, say something." The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Mr. Blackwood, if these documents are made public, the scandal will be immense. The family reputation will be destroyed. There will be an investigation even after so long. And the lady here," he looked at Eleanor, "will have legal grounds to claim part of the estate based on Josephine's will and the female line of descent." Theodore closed his eyes, stayed like that for a long time. When he opened them, he was different, less arrogant, more tired, more human. "What do you want?" he asked, looking at Eleanor. "Revenge? Money? To destroy my family?" Eleanor shook her head. "I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want Josephine's name cleared. I want her buried properly, with dignity, with a headstone that tells the truth. I want it known she wasn't mad, she was a victim, and I want to stay in the manor. It is my home as much as yours." Theodore looked at the manor, at that huge and decaying building that had been a monument of shame for him his whole life. "Stay," he said with a tired voice. "Stay and do what you want with this place. I want nothing more to do with it. I only ask one thing. Do not make the diary public. Do not destroy my family's name completely. My grandfather was a monster, I know now, but my grandmother, my mother, my brothers, they have no guilt." Eleanor thought, nodded slowly. "I won't make it public, but I want the deed to the manor transferred to me. I want to be the legal owner, and I want you to pay to restore Josephine's grave and place a new headstone with an inscription I will dictate." Theodore looked at the lawyer. "Is it possible?" The lawyer nodded. "We can make an out-of-court settlement, transfer of property in exchange for confidentiality regarding the documents." Theodore took a deep breath. "I accept." It took 2 weeks for the papers to be ready. Eleanor spent those weeks cleaning the manor for real for the first time, opened all windows, scrubbed all floors, removed all mouldy sheets from the furniture. Father Ignatius brought helpers from town, men who needed work and agreed to come to the manor now that the story had changed. Serafina returned too, bringing other elderly black women who had worked there decades ago. Together, they transformed the manor. Light returned to enter, air returned to circulate, sounds of life returned, laughter, conversations, the noise of brooms and buckets. And for the first time in 20 years, the manor didn't seem haunted. It seemed like a home. On the day the deed was signed, Theodore handed the document to Eleanor on the manor porch. He looked at her with a strange expression, a mix of respect and something else. "You look very much like her," he said softly. like my grandmother. It's not just the face, it's the way, the strength, the stubbornness. I think she would have liked you." Eleanor smiled for the first time in months. "I hope so." Theodore left and never returned. But he kept his promise. A week later, masons appeared at the cemetery and built a new marble tomb over the place where Josephine had been buried, and placed a large headstone with the inscription Eleanor had written. Josephine Cavendish Blackwood, 1828-1856, beloved mother, stolen twice, a strong woman the world tried to break, but could not. Rest now. Your truth has been told. Your daughter kept the promise. On the day the headstone was placed, Eleanor went to the cemetery with Father Ignatius and Serafina. She brought white flowers, kneeled in front of the new tomb and spoke softly, "Josephine, I know you brought me here. I know it wasn't chance. You called me through the blood, through the pain we shared. Thank you for giving me purpose when I had none left. Thank you for giving me a home when I had no shelter, and I promise I will honor your memory. I will make this manor a place of life again. Rest now, you are free." That night, Eleanor slept in the manor without hearing any weeping. For the first time, the silence was of peace, not weight. And she dreamed of a woman with black hair and eyes that were her own eyes, who smiled and waved and disappeared into the light. Eleanor transformed the manor over the following months. Used the money Theodore paid as compensation for basic repairs, fixing the roof, replacing broken glass, repairing the basement floor. And then she opened the doors. She created a boarding house for women. Widows, abandoned, alone, women with nowhere to go, women like she had been, charged little, sometimes nothing from those who couldn't pay, taught the women to read, to sew, to cook, to have a trade, helped them find work, helped rebuild lives. Serafina moved into the manor and helped cook for everyone. Father Ignatius visited every week, bringing donated clothes, food, news of available work. The town, which had turned its back on Eleanor in the beginning, began to respect her, began to see that Blackwood Manor was no longer a place of shame. It was a place of new beginnings. 3 years later, in the summer of 1879, Eleanor was in the yard supervising the planting of a vegetable garden when a young woman arrived. She was about 20, thin, pale, big belly of a pregnancy, red eyes of someone who had cried much. Her name was Alice. She had been thrown out of her home by her father when she got pregnant out of wedlock, had nowhere to go. Eleanor took her in, gave her a room on the second floor. Serafina made strengthening food. And when the child was born, 4 months later, it was in the manor, with Eleanor holding Alice's hand during the birth, with Serafina playing the role of midwife, with Father Ignatius blessing the newborn child. It was a girl. Alice named her Josephine, in honor of the woman who had created that place of shelter, she said. Eleanor cried, holding the baby in her arms, looking at that new and perfect little face, and she felt the cycle had closed. Josephine had lost 2 daughters. But her daughter was saving other daughters, was giving them what Josephine never had, choice, dignity, a future. Years passed. Eleanor grew old in the manor, never married again, didn't want to. Silas had been her love, and his memory was enough. But she wasn't alone. She was surrounded. There were always women living in the manor, always children running through the halls, always life. She died on an April afternoon in 1903, at 56 years old, sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, watching the sunset over the hills. She was surrounded by women she had helped over the years, women who returned to say goodbye. Serafina had already died 5 years earlier, at 81. Father Ignatius had died 2 years earlier, at 94. But his replacement, Father Matthew, was there to give the last rites. In the final hours, Eleanor murmured something the women around didn't quite understand. "She is here," she said, smiling with closed eyes. "She came to get me, saying I did well, that she is proud, that I can rest now too." And she died, with a smile on her face, like someone finally meeting someone she had been waiting for a long time. She was buried in the cemetery next to Josephine's tomb. The headstone read, "Eleanor Sawyer, 1847-1903, daughter of Josephine, bearer of her truth, mother to many, blood of none, transformed pain into shelter, loneliness into family. Rest with the one who called you." The manor continued operating as a boarding house for women for 30 more years, managed by Alice and then by her daughter, little Josephine, who had been born there. It was only closed in 1933 when the last resident left and the family decided to sell. But to this day, they say in the town that has now become a city, the manor is no longer haunted. They say sometimes on full moon nights, one can see 2 figures of women on the veranda, one with black hair, one with brown hair, sitting side by side, talking softly, laughing, like mother and daughter who finally found each other, like 2 women who suffered, who resisted, who won each in her own way. And they say also that women in despair, aimless women, lost women, sometimes feel an inexplicable urge to go to that old manor, and when they get there, even though it has been empty for decades, they feel peace, they feel welcome, they feel they are not alone, because some houses are not made of bricks and wood, they are made of memory, of transformed pain, of women who refuse to be forgotten. And those houses never truly die. They wait, always ready to welcome who needs them. Always ready to remind that strength is not falling. Strength is getting up after falling. Strength is transforming tragedy into legacy. Strength is refusing to be erased. That was what Josephine taught Eleanor, and that was what Eleanor taught hundreds of women who passed through Blackwood Manor over 3 decades. That even when the world buries you alive, you can choose to bloom through the earth. That even when they steal everything from you, they cannot steal who you choose to be. That even when they forget you, your blood remembers, your blood finds a way, your blood brings justice, and that in the end, the only haunting worth having is the haunting of love. The love that crosses decades, that connects generations, that transforms a mansion of death into a home of life. That was what Eleanor felt that last afternoon, sitting in the rocking chair, waiting. It wasn't fear. It wasn't loneliness. It was gratitude. Gratitude for having been called. Gratitude for having answered. Gratitude for having kept the promise she made the day she found the portrait in the basement. The promise not to let Josephine be forgotten. The promise to make from her pain something that saved others. The promise to transform a mansion of screams into a mansion of lullabies, of weeping into laughter, of prison into refuge. And when she closed her eyes for the last time, with the hand of one of the women holding hers, Eleanor heard clearly, as if right beside her ear, Josephine's voice saying, "Welcome home, my daughter. Welcome home."